Now, after the flight to Varennes, the king is obviously captured, and so the nobles are, the emigres that have fled are putting a lot of pressure on the Austrian king to declare war on France and to defend his sister. And so the Austrian king issues the Declaration of Pillnitz. And the Declaration of Pillnitz states that Austria will go to war against France if all of the other major countries in Europe agreed to form this coalition to stop the revolution in France. Now, Austria knows that Britain, for example, is not going to agree to this, because Britain is historically isolated and has no interest in getting involved in a war in France. And so Austria thinks it's good. Everything's good. The Austrian king doesn't really want to get involved anyway, so this is a way to placate the emigres that want him to get involved. He can say, okay, I'll get involved if everyone else gets involved, and that way he doesn't actually have to get involved. The reality is, however, that the Declaration of Pillnitz will be used by people in France to say that, look, these other countries are enemies of the French Revolution. These other countries, including Austria, want to destroy the revolution, and therefore these other countries must be defeated. Without their defeat and the spread of French revolutionary ideas of liberty and equality elsewhere, without the defeat of these other countries, the French Revolution will never be secure. And so therefore, France decides to go to war against Austria after the Declaration of Pillnitz. It's sort of a preemptive war, right? They go to war in order to protect French revolutionary ideals, which they think are under threat from Austria because Austria issued the Declaration of Pillnitz. And so war will begin. Now, this war was supported by many radicals, including many radicals in the Jacobin clubs. And the Jacobins are sort of an intellectual club that has many branches across in different areas, made up mainly of lawyers and other members of the bourgeoisie. Many of them are radical and want change. They're influenced by the philosophes of the Enlightenment. But there's many sans-culottes too that feel that the conditions in France are just as bad as they were in 1989. They feel like the revolution has not helped their conditions, therefore, and therefore they want further revolution. And so in the summer of 1792, there's going to be more pressure on the government, violence breaking out in cities. For example, in Paris, there will be in the summer of 1792, suspected counter-revolutionaries will be dragged out of prisons and killed. And there will be a storming of the Legislative Assembly. A large mob in Paris in August of 1792 will storm the Legislative Assembly and demand a new government. And this new government will be created by a national convention. And so they call it a national convention because it's like the Constitutional Convention in America. Likewise, this national convention will create a new constitution for a new government. A government that many of these radicals hope will be more radical, that will be more pro-reforms and more revolutionary. So the first thing the National Convention does is it declares France a republic. And so 1792 will be the beginning of the French Republic. What does that mean? That means there is no more king. The king will lose all his power. And therefore, what will happen to the king? The fate of Louis XIV is a big issue. And at this point, the Jacobins begin to split. There are the more moderate Jacobins from the bourgeois class, and they support the Republic, but they do not want to execute the king. These are known as the Girondists. And the Girondists will therefore be more moderate compared to a more radical group of the Jacobins that's known as the Mountain. And they're known as the Mountain because they sit sort of in the back of the assembly, and so therefore they're higher up, and so that's why they get that nickname. And the Mountain is led by some, radical Jacobins like Danton, who is a politician in Paris. He's a lawyer. Another radical politician, or another radical member of the Mountain is the journalist Marat. And the journalist Marat will write all sorts of stories about those counter-revolutionaries that are representing a threat to the revolutionary government. And, of course, quite prominent amongst the Mountain is a young lawyer who up to this point had been relatively quiet, but becomes more outspoken and more active, and that lawyer is Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre. Now, the National Convention is going to face all sorts of challenges. Ultimately, the vote is by one, the king will be executed. So the king is found guilty of treason against the French state overwhelmingly, but by one vote, he is found, the punishment is decided to be execution. Now, in the aftermath of this, the revolution will continue to get more radical. There will be pressures against the Girondists, who will be regarded as moderates or counter-revolutionaries. Marat, for example, will write all sorts of articles about how they are a threat to the revolution because they don't support it, because they didn't support the execution of the king. Many of the Girondists are from the bourgeoisie class and want to see a protection of private property and therefore oppose the economic controls that many people are demanding. And many sans-culottes are demanding that the government reduce the price of bread and demanding that the government do something about the social inequality that exists across France. And so the government does. The government puts in place price controls on items. And to fight the war against Austria, the government will also start employing people in order to make armaments. And so the government here gets involved in the economy in order to fight the war. And some historians say that this is really the first example where we have total war in Europe, where we have the government changing society and therefore changing what people can do, how people are living in order to fight this war. Question?
So, laissez-faire is when there was free, like...
Laissez-faire means free trade,
Okay.
limited government interference.
So now laissez-faire is stopped.
Yes, the sans-culottes don't like the laissez-faire idea because that's what's allowed the bourgeoisie to make so much money, and that's what's resulting in these high prices. So they want to limit laissez-faire economics. Now, there's a lot of resistance to these price controls. As you can imagine, if you're going to lower the price of bread, then the people that make that bread will make less money, so therefore the peasants are not going to make as much money, and the landowners are not going to make as much money. And so that hurts them. There's a lot of resistance to this national convention in Paris from outside regions. And so there's breakaway regions like the Vendée, which is a region in the west of France, and in cities like Nantes, which we know from the Edict of Nantes, in which there is a lot of people that oppose this government and are basically breaking away. And so France is on the verge of civil war.